So this week it's something a little bit different. I'm so excited about this one. So I get sent quite a lot of stuff. I'm lucky I get sent pens to try out and to give away and little collaborations here and there. This is something that I've been thinking about buying for an awful long time. I'm going to be swatching a whole range of watercolour paints today. And Deep Deep Light had done a post basically saying we're looking for brand ambassadors. And they wanted to sort of encourage people who had an urban sketching background. So I thought, oh, I'll get in contact with them, and I did, and they reached out and they've sent me a palette full of paints for me to play with. And just as interesting, actually, they've sent me some spot cards. And now spot cards, if you don't know what they are little samples where they'll put a little watercolour dot on a piece of paper. And they're samples so that you can test a tiny little bit of paint without committing to buying a whole lot. Sometimes some makers you have to buy spot cards from them, like Daniel Smith, but to be honest with you, they're quite good fun and not expensive, so it's always worth looking out for that. The way I like to assess watercolours is I will do a swatch, which is basically when you create a bit of empty paper and just colour in a section. And also then I like to combine them and mix them, and because it's really how those watercolours work together as well as how they work separately, if you know what I mean. So yeah, dead excited. I'm dead excited, me. Dead excited. So what am I doing? So just to get an initial feel for these, what I'm going to do is I'm going to do a square. Here we go, and then I'm going to split that in half and half again. You can hear on this really rough cardy handmade paper, which is one of my favourite papers, how the flat nib of the pen, it's a food pen, so it's got a bent nib with a flat end, it just skips across the top of the paper. So what I'll do is, as I unpack these, the order is obviously not perfect, but it's not really in a palette. I mean, this is just a storage tin, really. It's not like I'm going to be mixing in here. So now we're going to have quite a lot of unpacking. So we've got permanent yellow light. What I'm doing here is I'm just actually keeping a record as much as anything of what is actually in these tins. So next we have a primary blue. They're such beautiful little pieces of packaging. You almost look like they've been written by hand. Wild, alive and free. Very sweet. So this is Rosso Magenta. If you have a look on the website for Deep Deep Light, they have, it's a nice website. They've got a little bit of information. It's not too overwhelming. It's not overly technical, which is quite nice. But they have quite a good PDF you can download that goes through all their colour range. And they'll do one for print and one for screen, which is quite nice. I'm just trying to take these out of the packaging because they look so lovely. Right, so I've turned all these over, and as you can see, there's wonderful names. And a juniper, green woodpecker, router's dream, forget me not. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to transfer all these names over to here while I remember before I forget. Starry night, starry, starry night, paint my buttocks blue and white. Oh, do you know what I've done? I've missed a whole row off, haven't I? How have I managed that? 4 along and 5 deep across this 20. Oh, umbre light. There's quite a lot of earth colours in this lot, which I quite like. Bark, again, I'm interested to see what that looks like. Right, so then I have to just unpack all these now, which is going to take a wee while. I've used Winsor & Newton, I've used various Chinese brands, Paul Rubens stuff. I've used St. Petersburg White Knights. I've used Daniel Smith. I've used lots of the mainstream ones, and I've been sent quite a lot of the mainstream ones to try. So I'm really curious about these paints. I'm really curious to see how a small company in Latvia, a small family company in Latvia can really just, put something together with very much their own stamp and feel to it. The packaging is beautiful. Packaging is absolutely lovely. And I love all these little sort of handwritten things. It's very, very cool. Okay, so for swatching, what I would normally use is some water, and I'd use some Mop brushes, maybe this small mop brush would be good. And I'd also activate the paint by spraying it on with a atomizer type bottle. So that's how I'd go first. So one of the reasons why I quite like going over the top of the text is because it gives you a bit of a vague idea about the pigment's transparency. And then we'll pick up a little bit of this primary blue. Ooh, that's delicious. That is almost like one of my perfect sky colours. I like a punchy blue sky. Right, so then we'll get some of this rose magenta. I mean, look at the colours here. Those just really pop, don't they? And then the one at the end is the rose hip. So this looks to be the equivalent of like a Pyrrole Scarlet or something like that. Oh no, it's actually a little bit more brick. That is a very nice Pantile colour. Great. These look beautiful. Really strong colours. So Vermilion, which is a colour. I used to have a Mini, a 1975 Mini, which is very plummy. Very transparent. Another great foliage colour. Starry Night. Oh, that's like a Payne's Grey. Maybe a touch of something else in there, but I'll have to swatch it properly. Forest Pigeon. It's quite a turquoisey grey blue. Like a nice nice sea colour, that. Winter Sea. Okay, so we have River, which is, again, it looks like a cobalt blue. It's another more realistic sky colour. They've been flipped around. This is River, I think. This one here. So I'll have to change the labels on those. Burnt Sienna. Really good. Okay, so then the Raw Sienna, which is just beautiful, isn't it? Look at that. Okay, so the Chrome Green. The Forest Green. All the greens, these ones. And that's a lot more blue in there. And this, which is the Router's Dream. Yeah, that's a really interesting colour. There's a lot of blue in there. That's a really interesting pigment. Have you seen how much this is, the Starry Night is granulating out? And the Forest Green is as well. That's really interesting. Primary blue actually looks quite flat there. It's going to be interesting to swatch these properly. Okay, Forget Me Not. It's a very pale blue. Just quite a subtle colour, that. Sorry about the noise of the gardener. Somewhere, it's somebody's. I think at one side there's a hedge being cut. Another side, it's somebody putting tiles or something. Anyway, that green woodpecker is an amazing colour. I love that. Such a fresh leaf colour. So again, a lovely soil, earthy tone. Okay, and finally, Bark. Wolf Donkey, Wolf Bark, which is a kind of Van Dyke brown, I think. It's a very dark brown. So as you can see, I've kind of just vaguely coloured this out, so at least I can see what's in my tin. That's the sort of point of it. Now, if I'd have been a bit more careful, I would have done a smaller one that would have fitted in there, but didn't really think of that. Ho hum, dog's bum. Okay, so I've dried this off, and the first thing I can tell you is that sometimes when paint's dry, you know, like cheap paints particularly, they go very chalky and they lose a lot of their colour. This ain't happening here. These are almost as poppy as they are when they were wet. There's really some very strong colours. I think, interestingly, the sort of primary blue and what is like a primary yellow, really. But yeah, there's some really interesting colours. There's some really interesting greens, actually. Quite a lot of greens that I've chosen here. And then these earth tones, you know, your Bark, Raw Sienna. Those look quite similar tonally, really, but when you actually look at them quite closely, there are quite different. That's a lot colder pigment, and that's a lot warmer. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to do what I would sort of consider a proper swatch. So let's get in with that. So in terms of So in terms of swatching, is there any difference here between how I did it previously and how I do it now? Well, there kind of is a little bit. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to have 2 on the go, 2 jars of water, and I'm going to use clean water and put down just a single wash of clean water on each one before I add the pigment in. And then I can just see how the pigment moves around on the water. I hope that makes sense. I'm using a Bockingford pad here, which is one that I've used before a million times. I know the colour of the paper. I understand the kind of texture, so it's known quantity for me. Okay, so let's go back and get a bit of this primary permanent yellow. So let's go down and have just a little think about some of these then. There's some really interesting stuff happening with some of these. If you look at the Starry Night, you can see it's quite a granulating colour, or actually I think it's probably more flocculating. So this has got an awful lot of texture in it, this Starry Night. I think there's a lot of flocculation in there. It seems to be yeah, it's creating a wonderful texture, and I can see sort of pigments splitting up into the different colours a little bit in that. That's really interesting. Some of these are just lovely flat colours. There's no granulation in them. Like if you look at the blue and the primary blue and the rosehip, they're very fine in terms of the way that the pigment's being ground. You can see French ultramarine will always have a small amount of granulation in it, as well as like burnt sienna, but that's what you want. You actually want some granulation in those because it gives you some free textures. This chrome green here is an interesting one. You can see how it covers it, over the, you can almost can't see the black line behind there. It doesn't seem to have a lot of transparency to it, which is actually really nice because you sometimes want quite a heavy green. These two are lovely. This juniper is just such a beautiful colour, and that for winter skies or seas. This is a really interesting one. This reminds me a little bit of a sort of moonglow type colour. It kind of looks like a glowing cloud. I think you could use that for skies on its own and just let it do its magic. You can see it's splitting up into sort of pinks and blue. There's some blues in there and even some sort of slight greens. It's a very luminous colour. That's amazing. Yeah, and I reckon if you were to add in dots of clean water in there, when you get backruns, it's going to do all sorts of interesting things, sort of chromatography. Juniper's beautiful, and then the umber light down here. I'll just win that space on the table, pushing things around. Again, that's a lovely flat colour, and actually that's what you want for, if you're doing masonry or just like a very flat background. You kind of want something that doesn't have a lot of granulation or variation. So bark here, again, that's quite a granulating colour, which is not a bad thing. This is interesting, this forget-me-not, because actually when it dries you can see the heavier pigments are doing slightly different things, and it creates a wonderful texture to it. That's a fascinating colour. I mean, if you were thinking about like a summer sky, that would be a really interesting paint to try for that. Forest green, again, it's a lot of texture there, some really interesting colours. And then going back up to here, look at that. I mean, that's just luminous, isn't it? I mean, if you were doing an urban sketch and you wanted a colour pop in a scene, you know, a pop of that, and you know, against the forget-me-not, you know, those two together, wonderful. Now I've decided to make this a sort of two-parter because it's getting a bit long. In the next one I'm going to be swatching some colours together, so it's going to be a bit more of an in-depth look about, you know, how these colours sit together on the paper and how they mix. So I hope you enjoyed that, and do check out Deep Deep Light's website. Yeah, thanks for stopping by. We'll see you next time.